So thank you very much for attending this very difficult session right after lunch on the second day. I think it's the most difficult part. I hope I will live up to your expectations. Before I start, just a few preliminary remarks. The first one is, well, you hear it obviously already from my accent. I'm German. That also means that you will probably not be able to get from my mimic that I am actually very excited and enthusiastic about this topic. Yeah. So I really love the books, and I'm with the Springer side of the company actually for now 13 years only, I have to say. So many colleagues are there for many decades. I joined in 2005 as an editor for books, of course. Then I spent in between 3 years in Beijing in China in our office, helping to set up our editorial roles in Asia. And then since 2014, I'm back, and just a year and a half ago, I took over this position with this fascinating title, Chief Book Strategist, which we invented because we found actually out that albeit we always thought that publishing books is a very straightforward thing. It is becoming actually quite complicated, and especially with e-books and e-book packages and all the technological stuff going on, there was not a single person anymore in our company who really understood books from end to end. So this is why we installed a small group that I'm having the honor to head, to think about what could be the future of books, not only from a technological point of view, but also, and then think about what do we have to do in order to make books for a very long time in the future. I believe this is our responsibility. SpringerNature is, as you know, a group of companies. The oldest one was founded in 1681, so we are doing books now for more than 335 years, and we intend to do books for a very long time in the future. But, and this is, I give you a few quotes here, it is not a given that in another 335 years there will still be books published by publishing companies, and this is basically the first thing that came to our mind when we thought about the future of books. We face challenges, but we face very different challenges than in the journal business. And this is the interesting thing. I think these days some kind of renaissance for books could also come from the fact that we are looking to potential disruptions in both journal publishing and book publishing, but the disruptors might be very different, and the reason why it is disrupted is very different. So being a publisher of books and journals might be actually a good idea of hedging the risk if one of the two is really under more threat than the others. But we see here, these are 2 quotes, or 3 quotes actually, from 2 of our well-known authors. You can Google them. You will find these quotes on the internet, I suppose. I will not reveal who it was, but these are real quotes from very well-established, very well-respected authors of ours. And it sets, in a way, the scene that we have to do something in order to make sure that the book will exist and the book will be recognized as how important I think it deserves to be also in the future. So in order to think about that, I would propose to do one kind of a thought experiment and think about the fact, actually, why are there books? Because I do believe, although I very much like the books, I believe that a world without books is thinkable. It would not be the end of history and not be the end of culture. It is a possible scenario in the future. I don't believe it will happen, but it is well possible. But then when we think about why are there books, then I come to the conclusion that books are there for a purpose. Books serve purposes. Authors have requirements, and in the past, at least, for some of these pieces of content that we now call a manuscript, the book was the publication form that served these purposes best and met these requirements best. So I agree it's a very simplistic model that I show here, but let's look at this and see what consequences we can draw out of it. So the reason for change is that books serve purposes, and these purposes actually are changing. So an author writes something, a manuscript, he has content and he wants it to be published. And then he has certain requirements and he has certain wishes and expectations for the publication form. It could be that he wants to use this piece of information to communicate with his peers in a scientific setup, or he wants to make sure that his ideas are preserved for a very long time, maybe forever. Maybe he wants to use this piece of information for teaching purposes, and then his requirements are completely different than others. Maybe he wants simply to show thought leadership on a certain topic and show to the community how his knowledge about this subject area is. Some people have more sensory requirements, want to feel the book, want to hear the book, or want to smell the book, and they will never go to an electronic format. So all kinds of requirements. I could give you 10 more. Sorry, it is just to show the idea behind. There are lots of requirements that people could have, and there are also lots of alternatives how to publish this piece of information then. It could be a print book, it could be an electronic book, it could be a journal article, it can be a tweet. Actually, conceptually, I think there is not a big difference between a book and a tweet, only that a tweet is a very short book with an open access business model. Yeah, but in principle, it's a very similar thing. But you could also publish it on a website and self-publish it somewhere. You could go to Wikipedia and enter your information there, whatever you alternatives have. And then typically when you go to a publisher and ask for publication of your piece, then it is typically attached to a business model. So that's my model where I want to say this is a very natural evolutionary path that we are seeing now. Technology, economy, and society changes all of these four elements actually at the same time. Technology changes what an author is able to write and produce as a text. Technology and also our society and economic issues change what requirements authors have and change what purposes are important to us in science and also in our daily life. Technology also certainly changes the number of available publishing formats that I've presented here. And again, here also this list is not comprehensive. You could see many more alternatives when you think about it. But also these elements change our business models. And so we could also argue why change anything, because this is very normal evolution. The requirements, the purposes change, the means of serving these purposes change. So maybe in the future the book will be the best publishing outlet, publishing form for this piece of information that an author writes. Maybe not, but then there are alternatives. But if we decide that we want to stick with a book, if we decide that we want to publish books also in the future, and it is our wish as a company, SpringerNature believes that, for various reasons, believes that we should continue to publish books, then actually we have in this model, and as I said, it's a very simple model, but it gives us some insight that actually we have in this model 5 different ways how to strengthen the book. And each of them actually we see within our company. For all of them, I could give you some examples what we are trying to do in order to make the matchmaking better and more in favor in the future towards the book and less so to other publishing formats. So the first thing that we could do, and that we are already doing, is we can change the existing formats, the existing ways of publishing. So we have books, we have ebooks, and we can add features, and I'll give you some examples in a minute or two. So we can change existing technologies of publication. The second thing, and I'll also give you an example for that, We won't do this very often, but there is in principle the chance that we also add completely new formats. I call it here adding new book formats, but it could also be a completely new format. I'll come to that also in a minute. But principally it's a different approach, changing one, saying we stick to the books, but we'll make the book more capable of its possibilities, or if you simply invent a new one. The third one, also a one that we have been doing as a company for books for definitely more than 10 years now, adding new business models. I actually did this experiment in our canteen in one of our locations the other day, asking colleagues, what do you think, how many different business models for books do we have within SpringerNature? And the typical answer, the average answer was 3 or 4. So people would think, yeah, we have the book, we have the ebook, we have ebook collections, and that's it. Maybe there is 1 or 2 more, but actually I've counted them, and there are about 25 different business models that we already have, and the figure and the number is certainly still rising. So adding new business models, making sure that no matter in which context you want to use book content is then met by an appropriate business model is certainly something that is very important in this context. And 1, 2, and 3, I think, are the obvious candidates, but if you want to have a good match, actually number 4 and number 5 is also possible and should not be forgotten. We have the power to help authors having different abilities to write different pieces of information and manuscripts. If we help authors to create multimedia content in the first place, for example, their choice of what publication format they want to be published in later on might be very different. So in helping authors to create content in a certain way might also add to the balance towards keeping the book as an important format. And then number 5, last but certainly not least, change or reshape the awareness of requirements. I think there is a responsibility that we have here as well, the publishing industry, but also the academic world in itself, that we remind ourselves and think about what are the elements of a book that we find very important. And I think many younger researchers tend to forget that there is a lot that a book can bring that a journal article will never be able to bring, such as context of a different chapter, such as consistency over a longer over 200 pages that you will never find in a journal article or in a database entry or in a tweet. So there are possibilities to remind ourselves and also the community and authors and readers that books can add more and books contain more than you typically think. So all of these 5 elements I think are very important. I'll now concentrate on here number 1 and 2 because we have to start somewhere, and this is more about technology, so fits better to our topic for today. But I think this is actually something that I wanted to say in the very beginning. We should talk more about books in general, so I'm very happy if there are questions to elaborate on number 3 to 5. But I think we within our company, but also within the industry, I think books is a very good topic that we really can share a lot of insights in the future. So I'll give you just some examples. I could give you even more, and I have to admit, there are some ideas that we have that I'm not presenting here. I mean, you would have expected that probably, but these are 4 elements and 4 aspects for books that we are currently already have added in 2018 or late 2017, or even in some of them even before, or that we will add by the end of this year, just to give you some examples of what we are working on. So first thing, the requirement from authors is very often that they want to use a book for communication. So if we then, and this is a kind of a red thread of argument in many of things that we do, why not combine the authority of a classical book with the possibilities of the digital age? SpringerNature is a company that has already digitized all of their books. 99% of our books are available in electronic format. We have also retro digitized all of our backlists so that you can now find 5 million chapters online on our platform. Is the digitalization therefore accomplished and finalized? No, certainly not. So we are in the middle of it, yeah, because, for example, of this first element here, books can be means of two-way communication, not only the author telling something to the reader, but also vice versa, and we do that with possibilities of what we call social reading. I'm not going into detail here because we have a session on that later on with a startup called Paperhive that we are also using here as a collaboration partner. Second possibility, also in a similar theme, combining the old authority and integrity of a full book with the new possibilities of the new digital age, is that we allow, or we will in 2018, allow authors to change their books in a much higher frequency than we would have allowed it in the print age. So we will make it possible that you can do at any given time an update to a chapter. This update will then only be available electronically. It will receive a new DOI, but the original printed book will continue to be the reference work, and we will online collect as many updates as long or until it justifies a new edition, so that the full book will then get a new pagination and then be published in a new version in a second or third or whatever edition. So it seems very straightforward, but if you go into detail, it's very complicated to keep the integrity, to keep all the records of librarians in proper and really set up the versioning so that nobody is really confused about what is the newest version of the book. It seems to be a very complicated thing in the detail, but I think our authors, and this is the feedback that we receive, expect this to happen sooner or later, because they think, well, in the digital age, we would not publish a book anymore if we knew that we will stick to the possibilities or to the limitations of the physical world, even if we have the possibility to change it in the electronic world. Then number 3, providing context and analytics. There are 2 projects within our company to guarantee that. One is book metrics and one is the SpringerNature SciGraph. You might have heard about both of it. It's the SciGraph linked open data project that we have, that we combine all pieces of information that we ever published, bring it in a large database of open access metadata, combining authors, institutions, content pieces that they have authored, funding, information from citations. So bringing everything together to build a large network of pieces, books and journals, and to link this in a knowledge graph that can be exploited, that can be searched by anybody. It's more or less a discoverability issue, but it also gives a lot of insights and context to certain books and chapters, what are closest other chapters that are very similar, from the same group of authors, from the same institutions, funded by the same body, and so on. So all kinds of search queries are then possible that were not possible in the past. And the second technology to provide context and analytics is book metrics. There we cooperate with Altmetrics and provide all kinds of citation data, social media mentions, tweets, reviews, and so on about, and usage, of course, electronic usage of books, to compare it, to make benchmarks, and to see what the result, the real life footprint actually of your book is. So I think this is very important that we are here on par. We had a very long time where this kind of citation data, for example, was only available for journals, and this is certainly one of the reasons why the book lost in importance for some academic disciplines. Bringing these information here into the community back, I think, certainly helps. And then fourth example, and we'll come to that in our next session, also a little bit more into detail. When we talk about open access, it's not only a journal issue, it's also a book issue. Offering books in open access is something that we experiment in. You could argue it's beyond experimentation phase, it's business as usual for us, but of course the number of books that we publish in open access mode is much smaller percentage-wise and also in absolute terms than journals and journal articles that we have. But then here also interesting is the combination, of course, if you do a book, the combination of doing a print version, which is by definition not open access, but then the electronic version then open access. I'll go one slide back just to bring back into your memory that I said, well, these numbers 1 and 2, conceptually different, change one existing format or add new formats, because my next example will be something where we are currently adding a new format, and this is one of my favorite projects these days. Maybe you have seen it, this one or another article. There are several out there. There was a review article in the Scientific American that is called the Reading in the Digital Age, Print versus Screen. And it's about what happens in your brain when you read, and in comparison when you read a print book versus you read a PDF or an EPUB on a screen. And the interesting thing is that you can do reproducible experiments that in some setups, in some contexts, especially when it comes to learning, you can do experiments where students score actually better in an exam when they learn from a printed book rather than from a flat screen a PDF document, for example. And you can observe that, and this in itself is, I think, very interesting. Some people, when they read this, say, well, yes, let's wait for another 10 years or 5 years or maybe even 2, and then it's gone, because then the next generation of students will be all digital natives, and then the situation will be completely different. But newest research shows us that this will not happen. Even in 100 years, we will still see this phenomenon, because it's simply connected to the way our brain works. The interesting thing there is, and as a publisher, in the beginning I didn't want to hear it, but it's actually very true. Mankind is not a very good reader. Our brains are not designed to read, because brains have an evolution of 1 million years behind it. Reading is a very, very new habit. So for the first almost a million years, there was no such thing as reading. There was just spatial orientation, to escape the tiger or to find the yummy berries back when you are out there. So it was a completely different training for our brains. If we now read, then we have to use exactly this brain center for spatial orientation. And this means that always when you connect something that you read with a fixed position in space, then our memories are much better equipped to memorize and understand complex issues, which is why the print book in some contexts actually resonate better with our brains than the electronic version of a book, which I find is very interesting, because if you have for example, if you read an ebook on a very small screen, like your smartphone or even your tablet, then you have to scroll what you read up and down. Scrolling up and down really means that a concept that you have just read that was in the upper corner might be then in the lower corner, or vice versa. So you disconnect the position in space which really means that you disconnect your ability to memorize that. I don't know if you share this anecdote with me, but I remember many of my university examinations where the professor asked me something and I knew I've read it, it was in the upper left corner. I don't know what it was, but I know where it was. So I know by my own memory that my spatial memory is much more powerful than my content memory. Yeah. And if you look then into the digitalization, I find it really interesting that although we now know these concepts, still we are doing all these PDFs and EPUBs. Although we could know that this is not a very good idea for at least some very complex textbook knowledge that we want to understand, that we want students or our customers understand in a very short time, then this is certainly not the best format. And the interesting thing is that by the time when the codex was invented, many centuries before now, nobody knew how the brain worked. So it was more or less sheer coincidence that the printed book actually resonates quite well with the brain. Likelihood is very high. That was my first, when I read this article, my first idea was, oh, it was good that we decided to produce all of the books still in print. Because obviously it might be actually better in a reading context. But my second impulse then was, well, then the likelihood is very high that there is a third format, except the print book and the electronic book, that actually is the perfect way of understanding and memorizing and reading books. Maybe not all of the books, maybe some complicated textbooks, for example, or some other kind of books, but there might be a format that actually works better. And this is why we are experimenting now with virtual reality environments where the book's actually around your head. You have your VR headset on, and to read the book you have to turn yourself by 360 degrees to see all the chapters and all the pages of one chapter. And then the hypothesis is that if it's a complicated text and you have to refer to 3 pages earlier, for example, to review something that you have already written, your spatial memory will tell you in a fraction of a second, much quicker than you have to refer to over there, rather than scrolling for a second up and down or turning pages and so on. So if you have a certain type of complicated text, this format might actually be much more easier to understand, much more easier to remember than any other format. We are currently cooperating with a few universities to do these experiments and find out if this hypothesis holds true. I'm by no means proposing that in a few years from now, Springer will sell, or SpringerNature will sell VR headsets, and we are all running around like zombies reading these books in a virtual environment. No, that will certainly not happen. But this is just a vehicle to understand that there are book formats out there who might be in a certain context, in a certain use case, much more appropriate to what we are already used to in ebooks or in print books. So by really taking this research serious, I think we can learn that although books are there for, the books as we know them are there for 500 years, by no means we are at the end of research, and this is why reinventing the book was one of the topics for today. I think we should really investigate as an industry, also we as being the largest academic book publisher, I see here a responsibility from SpringerNature to think how can reading books in the future be done in a more in a better way, to be more efficient as a student, to be more efficient as a researcher, and so on. So these are just some examples. I could give you many more, but maybe more in the discussion. Some very small long-term vision. Books are, in a way, like icebergs, I think, because you can see only the tip of it, and then there is so much more under the surface of the water in this case. So in principle, I think books will be around for quite a while. So we will not see the end of books in the near future. In another presentation just recently, I made the prediction that by 2040, we will still see lots of books around. And then somebody asked, why did I choose 2040 as the year for my prediction? And I said, this is the year when I retire, so I do not do any predictions beyond that. But until then, I will be very happy to see if my prediction holds true. So I think books will be offered in many more formats than right now, in many more business models than now, individually, in collections, as parts of books, all kinds of combinations that you could imagine. Books will be in itself much more communicative, so you can talk with books. You can really have a conversation within the book, and we'll see an example in a few minutes. Print and e-formats will be integrated, so the print book will not vanish. It will certainly, the business of print books will certainly go down a bit from now, but they will continue to be there. Books will be subject to quick changes, so we'll combine the speed of the internet with the concept of a book. Books will be adapted and individualized, and here a lot of the things that we have heard in the last section about ethics and integrity will be very relevant, because there will be individual information also going into the book. Books will be embedded in a context like a knowledge graph and connected to other resources. But to the expense that there will be in the future not one book that we can print out, nor a book that we can save on a memory stick or in the cloud. Books will be some kind of multi-dimensional in the way that they will change over time. They will change depending on who will look at the book. They will be kind of a very liquid thing. The core will still be, of course, citable and very stable. That's the essence of a book. This concept of stability is an integral part of the book, but what we read in the future will be an individualized version of it. And this means, well, this is why I say this is similar to an iceberg. Many aspects of a book, like the communication around it, the change over time and so on, will be very difficult to be visualized. So it will be a very complex concept, book. And also the second thing that will certainly happen, and we see that already happen right now, similar to the quotes that I've showed you right in the beginning, there are lots of people already who believe we don't need any books anymore. And I think this will continue to happen because lots of readers of our books do not know that they are reading a book. This is the downside of having an ebook collection where people jump in and out just by a search engine, find a concept, go into the page, read 1 or 2 pages, and then go out. They believe they have read something in a database, on a website, whatever, but they have no recognition of the integrity of the full book. This is a trend that may well be accelerated in the future. Authors will still write books, and there will still be readers of books, but many readers will, when they are actually reading the electronic version of a book, not be aware that they are currently reading a book. Books will be very different from now, but they will have a future. That's my prediction for 2040. Thank you very much.